You think because you read a pamphlet in the waiting room, you can lecture me on the law? Judge Patrick sneered, his gavel hovering like an executioner's axe. The courtroom held its breath. The black woman before him didn't flinch. She adjusted her simple, wire-rimmed glasses. I think, Your Honor, that the law applies to everyone in this room. Even you. Patrick threw his head back and laughed, a cruel, echoing sound. I am the law here, sweetheart. I can have you jailed for contempt in 3 seconds. The air in room 402 of the Cook County Circuit Court always felt heavy, thick with the quiet desperation of those who had nowhere else to go. But for Judge Patrick Vance, the stale, slightly damp air of the downtown Chicago courthouse was the sweet perfume of absolute authority. Elevated 3 feet above the rest of humanity behind a massive, dark mahogany bench, Patrick viewed his courtroom not as a hall of justice, but as a personal fiefdom. At 45, Patrick was the quintessential portrait of generational privilege. His silver-flecked hair was perfectly coiffed, his judicial robes custom-tailored to hide the slight paunch of too many expensive steakhouse dinners. Behind him, meticulously hung precisely 2 inches above eye level, was his framed diploma from the Georgetown University Law Center, a credential his father's hefty endowments had helped secure. Patrick had never known a day of true struggle, and it showed in the arrogant, dismissive curve of his lips. He didn't just preside over cases. He lorded over them. It was a dreary Tuesday morning, and the docket was overflowing with what Patrick privately referred to as the city's detritus. Evictions, minor civil disputes, small claims, and municipal infractions. To Patrick, these weren't people. They were annoyances delaying his 1 p.m. tea time at the country club. Next case, Patrick barked, not even bothering to look up from his phone, where he was discreetly checking the stock market. And keep it brief, I don't have all day to listen to sob stories. The atmosphere in the gallery was suffocating. The bailiffs stood like stone gargoyles, long accustomed to the judge's tyrannical moods. The court reporter, a nervous young woman named Sarah, kept her eyes glued to her stenography machine, terrified of catching his ire. Patrick had a well-known reputation in the legal circuit. He was a bully. He favored corporate lawyers who spoke his country club language and routinely humiliated unrepresented citizens, especially minorities and the working class, who stumbled through the confusing labyrinth of legal jargon. Earlier that morning, he had mercilessly berated a young Hispanic mother for improperly filing a motion to delay her eviction, scoffing at her broken English until she left the stand in tears. The cruelty was the point. It was how Patrick maintained control. He believed fear was the only language the lower classes understood. "Bailiff, did you hear me?" Patrick snapped, his voice cracking like a whip against the acoustic tiles of the ceiling. "Call the next nuisance before I hold this entire gallery in contempt for wasting my time." "Case number 2026-CV-0894, the bailiff boomed. "Apex Towing and Recovery versus Eleanor Vance. Defendant is present, or, wait, defendant is represented by a proxy." Patrick finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. He hated proxies. He hated unrepresented people trying to play lawyer even more. "Well?" "Step up to the podium and speak into the microphone. I'm not deaf, though this job makes me wish I were." From the back row of the gallery, a figure stood up. She was entirely unassuming. She wore a simple charcoal grey cardigan over a plain white blouse and dark slacks. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, no-nonsense bun, and she carried a battered tan leather briefcase that looked like it had seen decades of hard use. She walked down the central aisle with a slow, deliberate grace that, to a more observant man, would have screamed of quiet, inherent power. But Patrick was not observant. He was prejudiced. He saw a middle-aged black woman in a cheap sweater, representing a relative in a trivial $1,500 towing dispute against a predatory corporation whose sleazy lawyer Patrick played golf with on the weekends. Patrick leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, steepling his fingers. A condescending smirk danced on his face. This was going to be easy. This was going to be fun. He loved tearing apart people who thought they had a fighting chance. State your name for the record, Patrick sighed, projecting extreme boredom. The woman reached the podium. She didn't nervously shuffle her papers or clear her throat. She simply looked up, her dark, piercing eyes meeting Patrick's cold blue ones. "My name is Tiffany," she said softly. Yet her voice carried an unusual resonance that easily reached the back of the room. "I am here on behalf of my aunt, Eleanor Vance, regarding an unlawful seizure of property by Apex Towing." Patrick scoffed, rolling his eyes dramatically for the benefit of the smirking corporate lawyer sitting at the plaintiff's table. "Unlawful seizure? Oh, we have a legal scholar in the house. This should be entertaining. Proceed, Tiffany. But keep it under 3 minutes. My patience is already exceptionally thin." Tiffany did not rise to the bait. The sneer, the eye roll, the condescending quotation marks around her name. She absorbed it all with the serene detachment of a granite cliff face weathering a light drizzle. She opened her battered briefcase and extracted a single neatly tabbed manila folder. "Your Honor," Tiffany began, her tone even, measured, and entirely devoid of the trembling deference Patrick usually demanded. "On the night of April 4th, Apex Towing removed my aunt's vehicle from a legally zoned residential parking space. According to the Illinois Vehicle Code, Section 18-302, specifically regarding commercial relocation of trespassing vehicles." "Stop," Patrick interrupted, holding up a manicured hand. He leaned forward, his brow furrowed in exaggerated incredulity. "Did you really just come into my courtroom and try to quote the Illinois Vehicle Code to me? Me? I am establishing the legal foundation for the defense, Your Honor," Tiffany replied smoothly. "The statute clearly mandates that warning signage must be visibly posted for a minimum of 24 hours prior to a tow in a residential zone. We have date-stamped photographic evidence that Apex Towing erected the temporary no parking sign exactly 45 minutes after the vehicle was towed." The corporate lawyer for Apex, a slick man in a $1,000 suit named Bradley, jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is hearsay. The defendant is not a sworn witness, and she's not an attorney of record. She's just a relative trying to save a few bucks." "Sustained," Patrick said instantly, slamming his gavel down lightly for effect. He looked at Tiffany with unvarnished pity. "Look, Tiffany, I know you probably spent all night watching reruns of Law and Order and Googling legal terms, but that's not how the real world works. You don't just walk in here with a cell phone picture and accuse a legitimate tax-paying business of illegal seizure." "With respect, Your Honor," Tiffany countered, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, becoming colder. "The rules of civil procedure allow for the submission of time-stamped metadata as evidentiary exhibits in small claims. It is not hearsay. It is digital forensics. Furthermore, Apex Towing has a documented history of predatory practices in this specific zip code. A zip code, I might add, that is predominantly lower income and minority." Patrick's face turned a shade of crimson. The audacity of this woman. She wasn't cowering. She wasn't begging. She was challenging him. And worse, she was subtly calling out the racial and economic biases of the system. His system. "Are you accusing this court of bias, ma'am?" Patrick demanded, his voice rising, bouncing off the oak-paneled walls. "I am stating facts regarding the plaintiff's business model," Tiffany replied, completely unbothered by his rising volume. "Facts that are entirely relevant to whether this court should grant their motion for summary judgment." "I decide what is relevant in my courtroom," Patrick roared. The gallery visibly flinched. Sarah, the court reporter, typed furiously, her fingers a blur. "You are bordering on contempt, ma'am. You stand there in your little sweater, holding your little folder, and you think you have the mental capacity to debate jurisprudence with a man who graduated top of his class at Georgetown Law." Tiffany looked at him for a long, quiet moment. The silence in the room stretched until it felt brittle, ready to snap. She looked at his framed diploma on the wall, then back to his red, furious face. "A Georgetown education is a fine privilege, Your Honor," Tiffany said quietly. "But an Ivy League diploma does not grant a judge the right to ignore statutory law, nor does it excuse a fundamental lack of judicial temperament." According to the Illinois Code of Judicial Conduct, a judge shall be patient, dignified, and courteous to litigants. The courtroom let out a collective, silent gasp. Bradley, the corporate lawyer, actually dropped his pen. Patrick stared at her, genuinely stunned for a fraction of a second. No one spoke to him this way. Lawyers with 30 years of experience cowered before him. Politicians asked for his blessing. And here was this absolute nobody, this black woman in a cardigan, quoting the judicial code of conduct to his face like a disappointed schoolteacher scolding a petulant child. The sheer shock quickly morphed into a profound, bubbling rage. Patrick felt the heat rise from his collar. He was going to destroy her. He was going to make an example of her so brutal that no one in this city would ever dare cross him again. He would have her thrown in the county lockup for a weekend, just to teach her a lesson about respect. "Well," Patrick whispered, his voice dripping with venom, "aren't we a smart one? You think because you read a pamphlet in the waiting room, you can lecture me on the law?" Judge Patrick sneered, his gavel hovering like an executioner's axe. The black woman before him didn't flinch. She adjusted her simple glasses. "I think, Your Honor, that the law applies to everyone in this room, even you." Patrick threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, theatrical guffaw designed to humiliate. He looked to the plaintiff's table, inviting Bradley to join in, and the slick lawyer offered a sycophantic chuckle. Several bailiffs trained to follow the judge's lead allowed smirks to creep onto their faces. "Oh, the law applies to me," Patrick mocked, wiping an imaginary tear from his eye. "Sweetheart, I am the law here. When I sit in this chair, my word is the final word. If I say black is white, it's white. If I say Apex Towing owns your aunt's rust bucket, they own it. And if I decide you're a disruptive, insolent nuisance, I can have you jailed for contempt in 3 seconds." Tiffany stood perfectly still. To Patrick, her silence looked like the shock of a defeated animal realizing it had walked into a trap. In reality, it was the calculated patience of a grandmaster watching an amateur make a fatal move on the chessboard. "Is that your official legal standard, Your Honor?" Tiffany asked. "That your word supersedes the written statutes of the state of Illinois? I just want to be certain the court reporter has your exact philosophy on the record." Patrick glared at the court reporter. "Strike that last exchange from the record, Sarah." "Do not strike it," Tiffany said sharply, her voice suddenly cracking like a bullwhip, echoing with undeniable, startling authority. Sarah's fingers froze over her machine, caught between a rock and a hard place. "Excuse me?" Patrick practically spat, standing up slightly from his chair. "Did you just give an order to my clerk? In my courtroom?" "I am reminding the court of its legal obligation," Tiffany said, her gaze locking onto Patrick like a laser. "Under the Court Reporters Act 705 ILCS 70, a judge may not unilaterally order a court reporter to strike an on-the-record exchange simply because the judge realizes he has just confessed to an abuse of power." Abuse of power. Patrick was almost hyperventilating now. The veins in his neck bulged against his white collar. "You insolent, uneducated. I have dealt with thousands of people like you, people who think the system owes them something. You come in here with your entitlement, thinking you can outsmart a man who has dedicated his life to the law. You are nothing. You are a proxy for a squatter who couldn't be bothered to pay a parking ticket, and you think you can walk into my kingdom and dictate procedure." Patrick pointed a trembling finger at the bailiffs. "Bailiff, bring out the handcuffs. I am citing this woman for direct criminal contempt of court. 30 days in Cook County Jail, effective immediately." The 2 heavily armed bailiffs at the back of the room hesitated. There was something intensely wrong about the situation. The woman wasn't yelling, she wasn't violent, she wasn't even flustered. She exuded a terrifying calm. "Your Honor," Tiffany said, her voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register. "Before you execute that order, I highly recommend you review the precedent set in remarriage of Betco. Direct criminal contempt requires conduct that is calculated to embarrass, hinder or obstruct a court. Citing the law and asking for it to be applied fairly is not an obstruction of justice. It is justice. "I don't care about Betco," Patrick screamed, losing all semblance of professional decorum. "I don't care about your little codes and your little statutes. You come into my courtroom dressed like you're going to a PTA meeting and you disrespect me. Me! I know your type. You think you're untouchable because you know a few buzzwords. Well, I'm going to show you what real power looks like. Bailiffs! I said cuff her!" As the bailiffs took a reluctant step forward, their heavy boots thudding against the carpet, Tiffany slowly reached into her battered briefcase. "Watch her hands!" Patrick yelled, suddenly paranoid. "She might have a weapon!" Tiffany pulled out a pair of sleek black reading glasses and a heavy gold-embossed leather credential wallet. She placed them deliberately on the wooden podium. The dull thud of the heavy wallet seemed to echo in the silent room. "I don't have a weapon, Judge Vance," Tiffany said, her tone shifting from polite civilian to absolute chilling command. "But I do have an explanation." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. The bailiffs had frozen mid-step. The corporate lawyer, Bradley, was staring at the gold seal on the leather wallet Tiffany had produced. Even from 10 feet away, the intricately stamped crest of the state of Illinois was unmistakable. Patrick, however, was too blinded by his own rage and ego to see the warning signs. He thought the wallet was some sort of fake badge, a sovereign citizen prop, or a desperate bluff. "What is that?" Patrick sneered. "Are you going to show me a library card now? A membership to the ACLU? Put your hands behind your back, ma'am. You're going away." "Before I do," Tiffany said, opening the leather wallet but keeping it facing herself, "I want to ask you a few direct questions, Judge Vance, and I want you to answer them on the record, for posterity." "I don't answer to you," Patrick scoffed. "Oh, but you do," Tiffany replied smoothly. "Rule 2.2 of the Code of Judicial Conduct mandates impartiality and fairness. You just stated on the record that you believe my type comes in here with entitlement. Could you clarify for the record what you mean by my type?" Patrick grinned a feral, ugly grin. He was going to enjoy destroying her. People who look for loopholes instead of taking responsibility. People who think the rules of society don't apply to them because they can scream oppression. "I see," Tiffany nodded, her face an unreadable mask. "And you also stated that you do not care about the statutes or the precedents I cited. You stated that your word supersedes the law. Is it your standard practice in Cook County Circuit Court to ignore the Illinois-compiled statutes when they conflict with your personal mood?" "My personal judgment," Patrick corrected arrogantly, puffing out his chest. "My judgment is honed by decades of elite education and experience. I know when a case is frivolous. I know when a defendant is lying. I don't need to read a statute book to know that your aunt was parked illegally and that you're just here to waste taxpayer money." "Even when presented with photographic evidence to the contrary," Tiffany pressed. "Evidence can be doctored," Patrick dismissed with a wave of his hand. "My gut instinct cannot. I am the gatekeeper of this court, and my gut says you are guilty, she is guilty, and Apex Towing gets their money. Now, are you done with your little deposition, or do I need to add another 30 days to your sentence?" Tiffany slowly closed the leather wallet. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corners of her mouth. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator that had finally trapped its prey in an inescapable corner. "I have everything I need, Judge Vance," Tiffany said softly. "Sarah, did you get all of that?" The court reporter, trembling slightly, nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Good," Tiffany said. "Enough of this circus," Patrick barked, slamming his gavel so hard the wood dented. "Bailiffs, if you don't have her in cuffs in 5 seconds, you'll be joining her in a holding cell." The bailiffs stepped forward, one reaching out to grab Tiffany's arm. "I wouldn't do that, officer." A deep, booming voice echoed from the back of the courtroom. Everyone spun around. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom had swung open. Two men wearing impeccably tailored dark suits and earpieces strode into the room. They moved with the terrifying synchronized precision of highly trained federal agents or elite state police. Following closely behind them was a man Patrick recognized instantly. It was Robert Sterling, the chief administrative judge for Cook County, a man who practically held Patrick's career in the palm of his hand. Sterling looked pale, sweating profusely, his eyes darting frantically toward the podium where Tiffany stood. "Judge Sterling," Patrick stammered, his bravado evaporating in a fraction of a second. What brings you to my courtroom?" Sterling didn't even look at Patrick. He power-walked down the center aisle, brushing past the bewildered bailiffs, and stopped 3 feet away from Tiffany. To Patrick's absolute horror, the chief administrative judge of the county bowed his head in a gesture of profound respect. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice trembling slightly. "The security detail informed me there was a slight delay in your observation schedule. Is everything all right?" Patrick's brain short-circuited. "Your Honor? Why was Sterling calling this woman Your Honor?" Tiffany picked up her leather wallet, flipped it open, and turned it so it faced the bench. The gold badge gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Above it, an ID card bore her photograph and a title that made the blood instantly drain from Judge Patrick Vance's face, leaving him as pale as a corpse. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of deafening quiet that follows a bomb detonation, right before the shockwave hits. Patrick stared at the gold badge. He blinked once, twice. He tried to swallow, but his throat had turned to sandpaper. The words on the ID card burned into his retinas like staring into the sun. Tiffany R. Reynolds, Chief Justice, Illinois State Supreme Court. "Aye," Patrick croaked. The booming, tyrannical voice that had terrorized the courtroom for a decade was reduced to a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. "I don't understand." Tiffany unbuttoned the top button of her grey cardigan, seemingly shrugging off the persona of the helpless aunt, and stood at her full, commanding height. The unassuming woman was gone. In her place stood a titan of jurisprudence, radiating absolute, unyielding authority. "Let me help you understand, Judge Vance," Chief Justice Tiffany Reynolds said, her voice now ringing with the full weight of the highest court in the state. "For the past 6 months, the Judicial Inquiry Board has received over 40 separate complaints regarding your conduct on the bench. Complaints of racial bias, socio-economic discrimination, blatant disregard for due process, and horrific verbal abuse of pro-SE litigants." Patrick gripped the edges of his mahogany bench, his knuckles turning white. The room was spinning. This had to be a nightmare. He was Patrick Vance. He went to Georgetown. He golfed with the mayor. "Normally, the board sends an investigator," Tiffany continued, pacing slowly in front of the podium, commanding the room effortlessly. "But when I read the transcripts, when I saw how you systematically dismantled the dignity of the people you were sworn to serve, I decided I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know if a judge in my state was truly as rotten, as corrupt, and as deeply arrogant as the complaints suggested." She stopped and looked directly into his terror-stricken eyes. "My Aunt Eleanor is a real person. She did get towed. But I took her place today to see how you treat someone you believe has no power, no money, and no voice." "Chief Justice," Patrick stammered, standing up, his knees shaking so violently they knocked against his desk. I had no idea who you were. If I had known—" "If you had known?" Tiffany cut him off, her voice cracking like thunder. "That is precisely the point, Patrick. Justice is blind. It shouldn't matter if I am the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court or a struggling mother working 3 jobs. The law demands equal protection. You don't treat people with dignity because of their title. You treat them with dignity because they are human beings standing in a court of law." Bradley, the corporate lawyer for Apex Towing, was slowly sliding his chair backward, trying to physically distance himself from the radioactive fallout. "You confessed to ignoring statutes," Tiffany stated coldly, ticking off his offenses on her fingers. "You confessed to issuing rulings based on personal bias. You ordered a court reporter to alter an official record to cover your tracks, and you attempted to jail a citizen without due process, merely for citing the law. You didn't just break the code of judicial conduct, Judge Vance. You shattered it. On the record." Patrick looked desperately at Judge Sterling. "Robert, please. It was a bad day. You know me. We're friends. The stress of the docket." Sterling took a massive step back, holding his hands up. "Do not address me, Patrick. You are on your own." Tiffany turned to the court reporter. "Sarah, I want the transcript of this morning's entire session expedited and securely transmitted to the Judicial Inquiry Board by noon." "Yes, Chief Justice," Sarah said, sitting up straighter, a look of profound vindication crossing her face. Tiffany turned back to Patrick. "Patrick Vance, by the authority vested in me as the Chief Justice of the Illinois Supreme Court, and acting in conjunction with the emergency powers of the Judicial Inquiry Board, you are hereby suspended from the bench, effective immediately, pending a full evidentiary hearing for your permanent disbarment and removal." Patrick gasped, clutching his chest. You can't just—" "I can," Tiffany said quietly. "And I just did." The aftermath was swift, brutal, and flawlessly executed. It was the absolute manifestation of karma, delivered with surgical precision. "Bailiffs," Chief Justice Tiffany ordered, looking at the two men who had almost handcuffed her minutes prior. "Escort Mr. Vance to his chambers to collect his personal keys, and then escort him out of the building. He is no longer authorized to be in the restricted areas of this courthouse." The bailiffs, realizing they had just narrowly avoided arresting the highest-ranking judge in the state, moved with incredible speed. They practically sprinted up to the bench. "Sir, step away from the bench," the taller bailiff said, his tone devoid of the deference he had shown Patrick all morning. Patrick looked like a deflated balloon. His expensive robes suddenly looked like a clown costume. He stumbled down the steps of his throne, his hands shaking violently. He looked at the gallery. The people he had terrorized, the minorities, the working poor, the helpless, were watching him with wide eyes. Some were smiling. A woman in the second row, the Hispanic mother he had berated earlier, was holding her hand over her mouth, tears of relief in her eyes. "My pension," Patrick mumbled incoherently as the bailiff grabbed his arm. "My career. My family's name." As Patrick was humiliatingly marched out of his own courtroom by his own security, Chief Justice Tiffany took a deep breath. She looked at Judge Sterling. "Judge Sterling, you will assign a replacement judge to handle this docket immediately, and I want a full review of every summary judgment Vance has issued in the last 5 years. If we find that he has systematically railroaded defendants in favor of corporate plaintiffs, there will be a federal civil rights investigation." "Yes, Chief Justice, right away." Sterling nodded frantically, wiping his brow. Tiffany then turned to the terrified corporate lawyer, Bradley. "As for Apex Towing, this case is dismissed with prejudice, and you can inform your client that the State Attorney General's office will be receiving my personal recommendation to audit their towing practices in this district. If they towed my aunt's car illegally, I shudder to think how many ordinary citizens they've stolen from." Bradley swallowed hard, packing his briefcase with shaking hands. Yes, Your Honor." Tiffany picked up her battered leather briefcase. She buttoned her grey cardigan back up. In an instant, the terrifying titan of justice folded away, and she was once again just a woman in a sweater. But the energy in the room had fundamentally changed. The air felt lighter, cleaner. The suffocating weight of Patrick's tyranny had been eradicated. She walked down the center aisle, but this time the gallery parted for her with profound reverence. As she reached the double doors, Sarah, the court reporter, called out softly, "Chief Justice." Tiffany paused and looked back. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, speaking for every person in that room and every person Patrick had ever crushed. Tiffany offered a small, genuine smile. The law is a shield, Sarah. Never let anyone convince you it's only a sword. By noon, the story had leaked. By 5 p.m., the transcript had hit the local news. The viral sensation of the arrogant legacy judge trying to jail the chief state Supreme Court justice became a national headline. Patrick Vance's face was plastered across every network. His country club revoked his membership to avoid the scandal. His prominent friends stopped returning his calls. 3 months later, stripped of his robe, disbarred, and publicly disgraced, Patrick Vance was forced into an early, pensionless retirement, left with nothing but his framed Georgetown degree and the bitter taste of his own medicine. Karma had come knocking, and she was wearing a grey cardigan. Karma has a way of finding those who believe they are untouchable. And Judge Patrick learned the hard way that true power doesn't need to shout. It just needs the truth. Justice Tiffany's quiet dignity dismantled a lifetime of arrogance in a matter of seconds, proving that you should never judge a book by its cover, especially in a court of law. If you enjoyed this satisfying story of instant karma and justice being served cold, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love a good underdog story where the arrogant get exactly what they deserve. Finally, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another dramatic tale of truth, karma, and ultimate vindication. What would you have done if you were in Justice Tiffany's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.